Greensboro's International Civil Rights Center and Museum stands where once a Woolworth store stood. And on February 1st, 1960, 4 A&T students took a stand against segregation by sitting down at that Woolworth lunch counter. Well, fast forward to today, the International Civil Rights Center and Museum remembers the A&T 4 and the movement they began. John Swain is the CEO of the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. Give us a brief history of this building and the museum.
Yes. Well, many of our residents know that the F.W. Woolworth's building was slated to close in 1993. It actually did close in 1993. And the city was going to demolish it. And two of our local citizens here decided to step forward and save the property and turn it into a museum. They both understood the value of the landmark. They understood the value of the history and how it could be used as a teaching moment in the city and around the globe. Teachers from all over the country, visitors from all over the country come here because they want to study civil rights. They want to understand nonviolent encounters. And one of the things that was stated earlier, our founders understood the power of the international appeal here. Because in other places in the world, whenever there was an uprising or a protest or demonstration, it was always a reference back to Greensboro. And recently, we've had some visitors here, the student movement. They visited Charlottesville, they visited Charlotte, they went to New York and all over the country, but they came here because this is a touchstone of a student movement. And we have changed our presentations a little bit to remind students that it was the young kids at James B. Dudley that brought about an end to segregated dining facilities. The A&T 4, David Richmond, Joseph McNeil, Ezell Blair, and Franklin McCain, they were the four who kicked it off, and with the Bennett students, the Bennett Bells, that they are referred to as, they may have kicked it off, but when school was out for the summer, those young students at James B. Dudley came every day and continued this movement until July 25th, when the lunch counter was desegregated, finally. We also remind our visitors that there were sit-ins that took place in other places in the country. This was the first successful nonviolent sit-in movement that took place that inspired a nation of people to make changes.
There are a lot of questions people have about the lunch counter in particular. They ask about, is part of it at the Smithsonian?
Yes. When this lunch counter was restored, we removed an 8-foot section from here and 4 bar stools from the far end of the counter and sent it up to Smithsonian. We also gave a 4-foot section and an 8-foot section and 4 bar stools to the Greensboro History Museum. And 2 bar stools were also donated to the new African American Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. So this is a distributed artifact, and people are very impressed by it when they walk into it. Once it was restored, we got materials from other Woolworths to put it back to the way it was at that time. This is one of our more interesting artifacts that the museum owns, other than their lunch counter. And a lot of folks visit the museum and they have never seen a 2-sided Coke machine. In this section that's called Access Denied, when we were walking through here, we entered a section of the museum that is equivalent to the transportation station, where there would have been a wall separating this machine. On one side, where white residents would have paid 5 cents or whatever the price is over here, when you go around to the other side, it was generally a lot more.
Really?
Absolutely. So you can see it's 10 cents over here or 6 cents over here, depending on which label was in place at the time. But a lot of folks, they see this machine, and I think there were only like 104 of them made. All of them have been destroyed except a couple, so we were fortunate enough to get one. And
A machine built for segregation.
it was built for segregation, but Coca-Cola has said many times that that was not their intent, to put a machine out. Now, you know, if you sell a car, you can use that car for whatever you want to use it for. But when they designed this, it was to meet a purpose for segregated waiting rooms. And oftentimes, and I've heard folks say they remember sitting at a transportation station where the drinks would come out and they were hot on the side. They would have been cold on the other side of the machine. So this is just something that we teach people about conditioning of the minds and how people become accustomed to paying a lot more for services and products in society. This artifact is a robe from Justice Fry that was donated to the museum. And it's quite interesting when we bring groups through here. They're always looking for those local connections to the civil rights movement. Justice Fry has talked to us many times about his time on the bench.
He was the first African American on the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Appointed, yes. So he has talked about his voting in the state, and he's a very good supporter of this museum. So it's always a pleasure to see him walk in, and you're guiding a tour through the museum. And some of our tour staff who may be new, that do not know Justice Fry, we always stop and
Because he lives here in Greensboro.
Yes, he does. So his family is quite often bringing visitors to the museum.
When you have groups come in here, what do you want them to see? They come from all different backgrounds, from all over the world in some cases. What do you want them to see when they look at this counter? They look into these mirrors of sorts.
We want them to understand the power and potential of change in our country. We want them to not be afraid. We want to embolden them. We want to give them courage when they sit down anywhere in society. We want them to understand what took place right here with just high school and college students. People have different experiences when they're in this room. We've seen some cry. We've seen some get down and kiss the floor. We've seen people who are just in disbelief, and they reflect on those historical moments in our turbulent history. But what we want them to walk away with at the end of the day is the International Civil Rights Center and Museum is about the future. It's about the possibilities and how they can make changes in the world.
What brought you here?
I'm very interested in learning more about the civil rights movement, and I heard about this museum from friends and how great it was.
And this wasn't your first visit, is that what I understand?
No, today is my first visit, but I have 2 additional visits planned to bring my husband back with me, and my best friend is coming from Arizona in October, and she wants to visit.
What is so meaningful to you about this space?
I grew up in a county that was very racist, and I didn't like it. I never fit in. I still don't fit in, even though I still live in that area. And I'm raising a white male child, and I want us to be different, and I want to be a part of the change.
What brought you here today?
We were down visiting relatives, and then we found out about the International Civil Rights Museum here in Greensboro, and we decided can't not be here and not see this.
And so what did you think?
It was impressive, especially the timeline. I think a lot of people are familiar with the civil rights movement in this country, but not how things fit together. And so you begin to see the Montgomery bus boycott, how that connects to Birmingham, Alabama, and then later on to other civil rights developments and Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act and so forth.
A lot of people have an emotional response when going through the museum. Did you feel that pull?
It was very poignant, especially seeing like the arrest photos of all of the people who came together. But I think what was most poignant for me was seeing the completely multiracial, interracial element of people who were struggling for African American civil rights. It was something that impacted communities well beyond the African American community.
What made you want to visit this spot?
Well, I had always heard about this incident of the Woolworth sit-in, and so when I was coming here to Greensboro, then this was definitely something I wanted to see firsthand.
Did anything surprise you?
Well, how big it was, the counter, but also just it really brought home how pervasive the Jim Crow policies or laws were in the South that I had never experienced or seen directly, other than just on TV or what have you.
So what will you tell people about Greensboro and this museum?
To come and visit. It's a great museum and really filled with history and good information, and makes you come back or come away with really thinking about our history as a country.
And I saw a lady come up to you and say how much this meant to her, this museum, and how she had gone to get her family and brought them back, and then was bringing more people from and other families here because she was so moved by what she saw and learned. What does that mean to you?
We get responses like that quite often, and it just makes us work a little bit harder and understand the asset and the city treasure that we're taking care of for the nation right here in Greensboro.
How is the best way to visit the museum?
The best way to visit the museum, if you're coming in with a group, would be to make reservations. We usually take reservations for groups of 10 or more. And we're open Monday through Friday from 9 o'clock in the mornings until 6 in the evenings.
And if you're coming just with your family, not a big group, or if you want to make plans to come with your children perhaps, what's the best way to do? Should you make a reservation, or can you just come?
Reservations are necessary for small groups and for walk-in visitors. We just ask that you arrive before the final tour of the day at 4:30. And generally the museum is starting tours, guided tours, every 15 minutes.
Find out when the museum is open and other events happening at the museum by going to their website. It is sitinmovement.org.